course, these days were days. Evening, morning, one day. I'm going to talk about this aspect of days in the questions and answers program that we do later in this process. So I'm going to leave that idea to them. Point is, God created everything He created, heavens and earth and sea and all that is in them, in 6 days. Rested on the 7th day. By the way, the word rest doesn't mean that God got tired. It means, first of all, He was instituting a plan for man. And the word rest actually means He finished creating. He stopped creating. Anyway, day 6 He made land animals. So, if God made land animals on day 6, and reptiles are land animals, and dinosaurs were made on day 6 when God made land animals, because there's no other time God made land animals other than day 6, then we ought to be able to see dinosaurs and men, and we do. Some very remarkable evidence came in the last decade out of Montana State University. There's lots of evidence, but this is some incredible I will share with you today. Jack Horner's paleontological group went out into the Badlands of Montana, dug up a T-Rex. They got it out of the ground, brought it to the laboratory, they prepared it for investigation. Dr. Horner assigned the research of this animal to Mary Schweitzer, a doctoral student in molecular paleontology. And she was doing some gross observation of the morphology, the external anatomy of the animal, and noticed that on one of the hind leg bones of this T-Rex, she found a section of one of the bones that was not yet fossilized. Well, she researched that for a long time. But ultimately, at the beginning of her research, she took a section of this bone, sliced it in a little thin sliver, and put it in a microscope, throwed it up in the microscope, and looked down through the barrel of the microscope at this little sliver of T-Rex bone, and saw, to her amazement, a blood vessel and red blood cells. Wow. Well, after 7 years of research trying to prove that these weren't in fact blood cells, she concluded they were blood cells, but she wrote up her research in the Earth magazine, June of 1997. And she said, a thin slice of T-Rex bone glowed beneath the lens of my microscope. Blood vessel channels snaked through the bone matrix, and tiny chambers known as lacunae, which house bone-forming cells, appeared as small ovals. One by one, my co-workers, paleontology students from Montana State University, took turns peering through the eyepiece. The lab filled with murmurs of amazement, for it focused on something inside the vessels that none of us ever noticed before, tiny round objects, translucent red, with a dark center. Then a colleague took a look at them and shouted, "You've got red blood cells, you've got red blood cells." Red blood cells, the shape and location suggested them, but blood cells are mostly water and couldn't possibly have stayed preserved in the 65-million-year-old Tyrannosaur. Point. Notice, what she believes about the T-Rex is influencing what she's looking at in the microscope. Perhaps the mysterious structures were at best derived from blood, modified over the millennia by geologic processes. So, she showed these to her boss, paleontologist Jack Horner, renowned for his work on dinosaur nesting sites, a group of dinosaurs called the Meosaura. He took a long look and asked, "So you think these are red blood cells?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, prove that they're not." After 7 years of exhaustive research, she said, "So far we haven't been able to." So that same year, 1997, Dr. Horner wrote a book called Dinosaur Lives, and on page 228, he said, "But under the microscope, there appeared to be blood cells preserved within the bone tissue. Mary conducted a number of tests in an attempt to rule out the possibility that what she discovered were in fact blood cells. The tests instead confirmed her initial interpretation." Initial interpretation, blood cells. What's this mean? I was giving this presentation to a church community up in Fayetteville, Arkansas, a couple of years ago, and in the audience was a forensic pathologist. He came up at the end of the presentation. He said, "I don't know how these blood cells could last a few days, let alone a few years. But they're saying to us that if these kinds of compounds can be buried quickly enough and significantly enough, they could exist maybe a few thousand years, less than 10. So here's some really compelling evidence that dinosaurs like T-Rexes were running around on the earth a few thousand years ago, less than 10. Well, Noah built the ark about 4,400 years ago. I think that's interesting. As well, in the journal Science, in 1993, they said, fresh dino bones have been found in Montana. Bones of a young hadrosaur have been found, and the discoverers said that the bones have the same high degree of structural resolution as modern bones. Now that's the journal Science, December 24th, 1993. Now folks, that's pretty compelling evidence that these animals are not as old as we've been told. Okay? In the Sydney Sun Herald and the New Scientist, one was 1994 and the other was 1997 in terms of their years of publication. They record that a Wollemi National Park near Sydney, Australia, a Wollemi pine was found growing, and heretofore this tree was only known from fossils in the Mesozoic era. Dinosaur age. One scientist said it's like finding a living dinosaur. They found a living tree growing in the park that had only heretofore been found in rock with dinosaurs. That's interesting to me. Question 3 then. Where did the dinosaurs go? Well, this is quite a lengthy idea, but the Bible helps us understand that everything that didn't get on the ark died in the flood. Okay? When those animals and men got off of the flood at the end of the flood judgment, there were at least 5 significant effects of the flood that caused overwhelming extinction. 1, there was an ice age. 2, the climate had significantly changed. 3, the habitat was altered overwhelmingly. Human population began to spread within 100 years. And finally, continental division caused by the flood itself. So now we've got some serious problems, and animals just simply couldn't exist. Question 4. Were any dinosaurs on the ark? Well, I'm going to cite some passages out of Job. The Bible says in Job chapter 40, verse 15, look at Behemoth. This is the New International Version, and the reason I use the New International Version is because the New International Version has a note here after the word behemoth down to a marginal reference that says behemoth was probably a hippopotamus or a elephant. Problem is, look at Behemoth, which I made along with you. Whatever Behemoth was, he was made along with man. That really bugged some folks. They can't imagine it could be anything but something we understand today. Which feeds on grass like an ox. So this animal was huge. It lived along with men. And it was an herbivore. Next verse. What strength he has in his loins, and what power in the muscles of his belly. So here's an animal that had spatial characteristics in its pelvic girdle and in its abdomen muscles, okay? Which is an indication of several kinds of things. It could have lifted its forebody up on its hind legs. It was a rather strong animal. Of course, this is part of the reason God is using this to teach Job a lesson. But we recognize in hippos that you don't have that ability. Elephants do have that ability. And so we go on to the next verse to see what it says. The Bible says in verse 17, his tail sways like a cedar. I never will forget being in a large Christian school south of here. Large 4th grade class, about 90 kids in the 4th grade. Ever since I did that particular seminar with those kids, I've been seriously prayerful for 4th grade teachers.